This is a 1965 289 Cobra, and for sheer performance, there was nothing like it in the day. It dominated racing, and of course on the street it was really something. They even wrote a song about it, "Hey Little Cobra," if you remember that. And probably from those days when I decided I had to have a Cobra one day, and so here we are. Hi, I'm Bobby Rahal. And why don't you come with me and let me show you what's inside my car barn. After you. Hi, I'm Bobby Rahal, and I'm a proud member of the Board of Directors of the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, California. And welcome to my man cave. Today I thought we'd take a quick tour of what's in this man cave, which is really the culmination of a lifetime spent around automobiles, whether it's racing cars or street cars, and the passion that I still have for this great segment of our society. There's a lot of trophies, pictures, posters, you name it here, that we'll have a chance to go through. And I'll try to explain to you why all these cars, why they're special to me, what is it that's individually special to me, because of course, as growing up as a young kid, around racing cars, around street cars, all these cars represented a certain stage in my life. So welcome, I hope you enjoy it. So as I mentioned, you'll find in my collection it's pretty eclectic. I mean, there's racing cars, there's street cars, all different types, but they all reflect a certain period of my life, and that's why I've collected them, frankly. This car is a pretty rare car. This is a Lotus 19, and this car was built in 1961, way before I started driving, but really, I actually saw this car race in Canada in 1962. And of course, that was a year after this car was driven by a young Canadian driver named Peter Ryan, who was really considered the up-and-coming Canadian that was going to represent Canada in the world of Formula One. And Peter, interesting story, was actually born in Philadelphia. His mother owned the Mont Tremblant ski area, which still exists today. And Peter got into racing. He was a skier, competitive skier as well, naturally. Got into racing, showed a lot of talent, and at a young age was basically committed to drive this car and represent Canada in those days. And they used to have a big sports car race prior to the Grand Prix in Canada. They had a sports car race. They called it the Players 200, or also the Canadian Grand Prix. And really, the creme de la creme of racing drivers around the world came to that race to compete. What really solidified Peter Ryan's reputation was in '61, he beat Sterling Moss and a few other world-class drivers in the same type of car at Mossport. And this is the car that he did that in. The Lotus 19 was really a big step up in terms of technology at the time. In sports cars, this was actually what they did is they used the suspension off the Formula One car onto a tube frame that would have two seats, which you had to have in sports car racing at the time. And it was powered by a 2.5-liter four-cylinder Coventry Climax engine, which had already proven itself in international racing. 19 of these cars were made, but only 7 were made with a 2.5-liter Coventry Climax. And this was really the car to have in, say, 1960, 61, 62, just before they started putting American V8 engines into these same cars, which happened the following year, and then pretty much made these obsolete within a pretty short period of time. Part of the story that makes this car interesting, so Peter Ryan wins all these races, and he competed at the time against Roger Penske, Sterling Moss, I mean, you name it, the best of the best. And so he was sent to Europe at the end of the year to compete in European racing because, again, that was the place to go. And tragically, though, Peter lost his life in a Formula car race in France and Canada's great hope was gone. So this car really represents a tremendous era, really the era that where gentlemen drivers were still pretty much the norm, that it wasn't pay-for drivers. It wasn't there were no sponsorships, as you can see. I mean, this is the way the car looked in 1962. And so it really was the end of an era, because after this car, then the speeds really started to go up, and most of the cars were powered by American V8 engines, Chevys or Fords. And so this, as I say, represents a great era in motorsport and the hopes of Canada. So this is my 1966 Shelby GT350 Mustang. So as I said, my love affair with the automobile, the passion that I have for automobiles, street and racing, really came from my father. He began racing in the late 1950s. And so as I grew up all through the decade of the 60s, which I thought was just the most amazing decade when you looked at the progression technically of cars in 1960 versus 1970. And one of those cars that really kind of set the stage and also was reflective of the manufacturer's commitment to motorsports and high-performance cars in this country was the Ford Motor Company. And in association and partnership with Carroll Shelby, of course, they created the Cobra, which is still today one of the most sought-after cars ever. And as part of that program with Ford in 1964, they introduced the Mustang. And of course, it was just a huge success right off the bat. Now, the then plan, Lee Iacocca, was to make the Mustang into more of a sports car. And so he went to Shelby and said, "Can you do that?" And of course, Shelby, of course, would say yes to probably just about anything, and particularly if there was money involved. And the Mustang was produced in several different body shapes. There was a notchback, which was your basic Mustang. There was a convertible, of course, and then there was the fastback, the coupe. And so Shelby took the regular 260 cubic inch Mustang GT and upgraded the engine. It was a 289. They went 260 and then they went 289 in the street versions. He took the 289 and did various things, different manifold, different exhaust system, different carburetor, various other things to up the power to over 300 horsepower. And at the same time, in '65, produced the Shelby GT350. Now, the 65s are probably the most valuable GT350s because they were the first. And they were really homologation special. They had to build so many in order to be able to qualify to race in SCCA racing and in racing in Europe. And so the 65 car had a locked rear end. It had side pipes instead of out the back, as this car does. And it was, no back seat. It had been lightened, had Coney shock absorbers. All these things were to differentiate the Shelby Mustang from the basic street Mustang. Great cars, I've had a couple, but with that locked rear end, not necessarily the nicest cars to drive on the street, but pretty impressive cars. In '66, however, and this is a '66 GT350, it was the same engine, same everything, but it had a back seat, and also you could fold down, so it was made for more luggage carry room or what have you. But it was pretty much the same car. Now the exhaust went out the back instead of out the sides. It didn't have the locked rear end, so it's a lot nicer car to drive around town. Pretty much the same engine. And I think the 66s were really a little bit more of a civilized version of the GT350s in '65. So this car is just, I love the color. This is kind of a classic Shelby color, the blue and the white. And of course, they built the GT350s for many years beyond this body style. But I think if you were to talk to any collector, it's this body style, the original GT, that really is the most sought after amongst all the Shelby Mustangs that were built. So the next car we're going to talk about is this car, one of my favorites, 1965 Alfa Romeo GTA. I've always been an Alfa Romeo nut. My dad actually raced an Alfa Romeo in the late 50s, a Giulietta Sprint. I remember my brother and I, little brother, and I would be in the back seat. My mom and dad would drive the car to the race. You got to the race, you taped up the headlights, you took the cap off the exhaust, you got rid of the kids and the wife, and you went off racing. And hopefully you didn't crash, because that was your way of getting back home. And of course, that's the way racing was in the 50s to a large degree. But anyway, a great car and lots of great memories. This car, an Alfa Romeo, is a very special car. This is a GTA. And the GTA Alfa Romeo came out with this model in 64 or thereabouts. And they wanted to make this a race car, and for the GT category in Europe particularly. But they needed to build 500 cars for the street that included the upgrades that they were going to use for the race car. And so Auto Delta, which was the racing arm of Alfa Romeo, did all the racing preparations for Alfa, took these cars off the assembly line, and basically created hot rod, an Italian hot rod at the time. First off, the street car was all steel bodywork. This car was aluminum. They were trying to get rid of weight. And the way you can tell is in the drip rails here, you'll see the rivets holding the aluminum skin onto the steel frame. It also had plastic windows on the sides, lighter gauge glass on the front. It had, of course, a different modified rear suspension for better handling. The engine was really where the rubber met the road. However, the engine was an upgraded 1600cc street car engine, but in this case, it had a twin plug head, so 2 spark plugs per cylinder. Had a Morelli distributor off of Ferrari Dino, bigger Weber carburetors, a bigger oil sump. Various other modifications to up the horsepower considerably over the street version. They only made 500 of these cars in order to qualify the GTA for racing, and the GTA had tremendous success in racing around the globe. Really dominated the small bore GT category for many, many years. In fact, the basis of this car continued on through 1971. The engine went up to 2 liters later on. Of course, the GT-AM, which they call GT America, was very famous for its exploits in racing in the early 70s, 71, 70, around there. But again, what makes this car, even the door handles, if you look at the door handles there, it's just a little hook and a button. There's nothing fancy about this car. It's stripped down because they were trying to get the weight out of it for the GTA. This is called the Stradale. Stradale in Italian is the street version. It was also called the A in GTA was Allegorita, and that is lightweight. That means lightweight in Italian. So this car, how many of the original 500 still exist, I don't know. But this car is a really cool car, and if you love sports cars from the 60s, I think if you have a collection, you've got to have a GTA. Okay, so I said I was a huge Alfa Romeo fan. I'm probably just as huge of a Porsche fan. My father raced Porsches all during the 60s. I had a lot of success in Porsche racing cars in the 80s, winning the Daytona 24-hour in 1981, Sebring 12-hour in 87, and plus a number of other IMSA races in the mid to late 80s. So Porsche has always been a favorite brand for me. This car, probably when people think of Porsche, and whenever you see Porsche in the movies, it's usually in a car like this. This is the 356 Roadster. What makes this car so unique is that this is kind of the final development derivation of the Speedster, which really is the hallmark of Porsche in many people's minds. The Speedster came out in the mid-50s, early 50s, and of course the Speedster was very plain Jane. It didn't have roll-up windows. The top was manual. It was pretty simple, but what a great look and a lot of success in racing. with the 356, both the push rod and the 4-cam. The next kind of development of the Speedster was the convertible D, and that actually had roll-up windows. Now we're starting to get civilized, and the convertible D was just a great, that next kind of step. This car is the final derivation of the convertible D. This is a twin grill Roadster, and these cars, 248 of these cars were built. The body for these cars was built by the Porsche distributor from Belgium, the Ditron family, and that was it. This was the final hurrah. What made these cars kind of unique, however, is whereas the convertible D was based on the T5 body, which had a very narrow front luggage compartment and what have you, and various other things like different positioning for the fuel filler. This is the T6. The twin grill was the T6, which was common then with the next 356. So this kind of separates it, being the T6 body from the convertible D and the Speedster. It also has twin grills. It's named obviously for that. And again, the big thing is these cars, only 248 were made. And these may well be now the most valuable of the 356 series outside of the Carreras, because there were much fewer of these made than the regular Speedster or the convertible D for that matter. Powered by a 4-cylinder 1600cc Porsche engine, not the most powerful car in the world, 60 horsepower, this car, for example, but just a classic shape. And if you notice, unlike the 356s, there's no back seat. It's just a platform. Not even the passenger doesn't get a sun visor, only the driver, which probably tells you what they thought of passengers, I guess. No glove box. Still very simple, but really, when you drive this car, you get so many oohs and ahs and smiles from people, whether you're in the car or outside of the car. When you think of 48 Hours, when you think of Top Gun, what cars associated with those movies? It's a car like this. So great car. Like I said, not much on performance, but this car is all about everything else. So this may well be one of the most famous grills in automotive history, the kidney bean, and of course then it means one thing, BMW, right? So this car, 1972 BMW 2002 TII. The TII was a hot-rodded version of the 2002. This car has special meaning to me. When I retired from racing, 1998, the first thing I did was go to a company up in Northern Illinois that restored BMWs, and I said, this is what I want. I want a 72 Inca 2002 TII, black interior, stock. I don't want it souped up, just the way it was. And the reason I wanted that is because a car exactly like this was my car pretty much throughout my 4 years at college. And I kind of jokingly say this is where I learned how to drive race cars, because I would take this car out, and Central Ohio, Southern Ohio had great roads, fabulous roads, lots of hills, you name it, and twisty turns, and just I would go out and just drive the hell out of this thing. And what was so cool about this car is not only did it handle well and it had 140 horsepower, which was, pretty sporty in the day, but you could put 4 or 5 people in this car. You could actually put probably 4 sets of golf clubs in the trunk. For me, it was great because when I would go back to school every fall, I'd stick my Marantz speakers in the back seat, my Girard turntable, my clothes, you could haul everything you needed to have for a year in college in this car. And then when you took it all out, you had a hot rod, you had a sports car. And so I think in BMW lore, the 2000, especially the 72 TII, is probably one of the most revered models they made. The 2002 really, in many respects, saved BMW anyway. but the TII was like the ultimate step. They built them from 72 to 75. The 72s and 3s are referred to as a round tail light, because if you'll see in the back, they had round tail lights, whereas after that, they had big kind of square tail lights. And also the 72 did not have the extended bumpers. That happened in 73 when the federal regulations started requiring that kind of stuff. Of course, the 74 and 5 had even bigger bumpers, and which really kind of took away from the look in my mind. So the 72 is really the simplest, the purest version of the TIIs. And once again, this is a car that, I mean, it did everything. It just did everything, and it did everything really well. And so you drive this car on the road, you get thumbs up, everybody honks the horn, because a lot of people had a BMW 2002 or TI at some point in their past. And the passion that I have for BMW emanated from this car. After 72, I had a 75, I had a 77 320 Ti. I've had CSs, I can't even tell you, 750s, you name it. The love affair with BMW began with this car. And which is really why it was especially, I guess, satisfying or pleasing to me that many years later, RLL, our racing team, would be chosen by BMW to operate their racing programs here in North America. So it's come full circle. Interestingly, this car, when they introduced the BMW 1M, which they kind of referred back to that it was a new version of the TII, this car was on the car stand at the New York Auto Show alongside the new 1M. And also they did television advertising, and if you look it up, you'll see this car in the TV spot. So it's a bit of a movie star, this car, and loved driving this car every minute. So I've already spoken about my love affair with Porsches, and of course, to me, this is the ultimate Porsche, at least of the normally aspirated cars, the 1973 Porsche Carrera RS 2.7. Of course, 2.7 stands for the number of liters that it has. The Carrera, of course, a name that Porsche took. Of course, it means race or sport. Especially the Carrera Pan America, which is what it was dedicated to in Mexico. And this car really, of the original, say from 1965 to 1973 Porsches, 911s in particular, before the governments got involved and all the smog and the bumpers and this and that came into effect starting in 74. The 73, this was the ultimate version at the time. Actually, they did this initially in order to homologate the car for GT racing, just like the Alfa had to be done. And so they produced a first run of 500 cars. There were two types of RSs. There was the touring car, and there was the lightweight. The touring was a much more civilized. I mean, it had padding, it had normal seats, it had sound deadening materials. I mean, you name it. It had roll-up window or electric windows or roll-up windows. The lightweights, however, were bare bones, stripped, no carpeting to speak of, no sound deadening material to speak of. And of course, the 2.7 RS won many races on the racetrack for Porsche in 73, 4, 5. This car, as I said, they made an initial run of 500, thinking that it was going to be a real struggle to sell 500 cars. They went through the 500 so quickly that they decided to do another run of 500 cars. That went through super quick. And then they did 500 more. So there were 1,500 cars produced, RSs. Only 200, though, those 1,500 were lightweights. And so the lightweight today probably commands a premium of about 30% to 40% more than a touring RS. It's just, they're that much more valuable. And as you've seen, you'll look inside, and as I said, I mean, there's nothing to speak of. They don't even have regular door handles on the inside. Even the trunk is held. There is no latch mechanism other than rubber straps that you use to tie it down. The same thing holds true in the hood in the front. So anything they could do to take weight out of this car, they did. And yet you could still drive it on the street. So why did I purchase this car? I already had a touring car, restored a touring car, beautiful car, spectacular. Blood orange was the color. This is called Dalmatian blue. Only 4 of the 1,500 cars built were Dalmatian blue. Why is this car? Anybody who drives one of these cars will tell you that this is a hot rod. I mean, it handles like a race car, has tremendous acceleration. Remember, this car weighs less than 2,000 pounds. And it's got somewhere around 270 horsepower, 300 horsepower. So you do the math, and a pretty good power to weight ratio. Quick ratio gearbox, so that it's built for acceleration. And of course, bigger, wider wheels, the famous Fuchs mag wheels, which look so great on it. In the end, though, the reason I have it is this is the ultimate expression of the original 911 Porsche. So welcome to kind of my Indy 500 corner here. I'm fortunate to have won that race in our 5th year at the 500. Previous races, in 82, my rookie year, I was highest rookie with 10 laps to go and the engine broke and didn't finish. And then 83, led the race, qualified outside second row. 84, ended up 6th. 85, front row, outside front row, led the race right from the start. Then had a mechanical issue, so a little bit of frustration in those first 4 years. But thankfully it all came together in 86, and here's some paintings that kind of reflect that great day, of course, and as an actual picture from Victory Lane after the race. Really kind of says it all. It's the culmination of a long month in those days, culmination of a career. I remember calling my father up, who hadn't been to the race that year because he'd had back surgery. And of course, this whole experience for me started because of him. And I called him up and I said, "Dad, do you believe it? Do you believe it? We just won the Indy 500." And it was, a pretty amazing moment for all of us in my family, me and my parents, my brother. So all of this is kind of dedicated to that. And of course, you look back on these pictures, and there's Jim Truman, who was our team owner, a really wonderful man, had always supported me to some level. Then end of 1981, he says, "I want to go IndyCar racing. I want you to drive the car, and let's go." So we helped put the team together, and here we were 5 years later, the winner of the Indianapolis 500. But unfortunately for him, he was fighting colon cancer at the time, and in fact, he died 10 days after the race. So a bittersweet moment for us and the team, big deal to win the Indy 500, right? And yet it was kind of surrounded by the loss we were feeling of Jim not being with us much longer, and we knew that was going to be the case. In fact, before the 500, before I went over to Indy that year, he said to me, we got in his office, he said, "I'm not going to be here next year." And that's how we went off to Indianapolis that May.
Bobby, fantastic, unbelievable, great finish.
I'm almost in tears. This one's for Jim Truman.
And here he is. Here's the moment everyone's waited for. Jim Truman getting the congratulations.
Couldn't have been better.
It's yours.
Couldn't have been better.
And I think everybody in the team was, quite dedicated to trying to win the race for him. And it is something special for sure to be able to satisfy someone else's dreams and goals. And so we all felt really good about that. And of course, when you do win, of course you win the Borg Warner Trophy, or your face gets put on the Borg Warner Trophy. Now they give you this as well, what they call the baby Borg, because the real Borg is like as tall as I am and weighs a lot more. And very special. It's a beautiful trophy. It dates from the 1930s when Borg Warner lent it to the Speedway. It's still owned by Borg Warner after all these years. And so you have your face on the base of the trophy along with all the other winners. A little bit of trivia for those of you who maybe do the crossword puzzles or what have you, but my face is the last face on the original trophy. After that, they had to build an extension for all the other winners. So that's kind of cool to be the last guy. And then they also reward you with various other prizes as well. So when you win the Indy 500, one of the nice pluses is they give you the keys to one of the pace cars from that year. And I was really pleased that in '86, it was this Corvette was one of the pace cars. And what was even, I think, really even cooler was that Chuck Yeager, the very famous Air Force pilot, broke the speed of sound. He was the pace car driver that year. So he gave me this car. I have a picture autographed by him of us with this car. And this car probably is the lowest mileage '86 Corvette that exists, because I've had it for, well, since '86. And I think maybe it's got 2,500 miles on it, maybe. So this is like the part of, this kind of finishes off that Indy 500 corner. And great car. So maybe many of you may not know it, but my favorite track that I've ever raced on is Road America in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. 4 miles long. It's maybe one of two circuits that is exactly the same today in 2020 as it was the day it was built in 1957, I think was the first year. And that doesn't happen to most circuits. They put chicanes in there or they do something. But Elkhart Lake is pure. Road America is pure from the day it was built. And so I started going there. I think 1959 was the first race I went to with my parents to watch. And then all through the 60s, my dad raced there, and I would go there and hang out, walk around the track, watch my dad go, watch all the great drivers of that day, McLaren, Holm, Eamon, of course, Mario Andretti, Brian Redmond. I mean, the list goes on and on of just the great drivers. Mark Donahue, watched him win there in 74 with the turbo Porsche. Just loved the place. And I couldn't wait as a driver to drive there after all those years. I got that chance in the fall of '74. And every year pretty much went back to Elkhart Lake to race either once or twice a year. Indy cars were a real thrill to drive around there because of their speeds. Three straightaways of decent length and speeds over 200 miles an hour. The average speed at Elkhart had 3 corners that were very, very slow. They were all 90-degree left-hand corners. Turn 5, turn 6, and turn 8. And even with those slow corners, the average speed in 2001 in the IndyCar race was almost 140 miles an hour. So that means, very, very fast. Well, when I retired, I'm a kid of the 60s, right? What did you have in the 60s? You had a skateboard and you had a slot car, because slot car racing really came on the scene in probably the mid-60s. And so I'd go down to my little town in Glen Ellen, Illinois, where I grew up, and had a slot car track, and that's where you hung out. And so now that I'm an older kid, what was the first thing I had to do? Well, you got to have a slot car set, right? And in this case, there's a company out of the Michigan area near Detroit called Slot Mods, and they basically will build anything that you want. So I called David Beatty, who owns the company. I said, okay, I want to do Elkhart, but I want Elkhart to look the way it looked back in the 60s, not the way it looks today. So luckily, my mother was a pack rat, and we had all these old programs from those years. And so David came here, and we sat down and went over these old programs. And I said, okay, you see the pagoda over there. That's the way it looked even up to the late 70s before a new pagoda was built. The barn over here is still there, and is timing and scoring. You can see the top 5 or 6 guys off that barn. It is still there. I think Road America's had to rebuild it 2 or 3 times because of its age, but it's such a landmark. And then of course, just the topography, the pits right here look exactly the way they looked like up until maybe the late 70s, and now they've replaced those. But I wanted the quaintness, I suppose, and the things that I remember so much about Road America. So this track was built with that in mind. Let's try to recreate maybe 1969 here in the man cave. And so we built this beautiful slot car track. The front straight's about 20 feet long. Not quite sure what the scale mile per hour is, but I can tell you it's fast. And it has elevation change like the real track has, the bridges, the land features that the real track has. And so these guys did a great job with it. And so we come down here, all my buddies, and act like a bunch of kids again and race slot cars. My hero when I was growing up in the early 60s, mid 60s, was Jimmy Clark. Of course, I was a road racing fan. My dad raced, road racing, sports car racing. And so I really looked to Europe to a certain extent for my heroes, but here as well. But of course, Grand Prix racing was the ultimate, I thought. And in fact, I strived to get to Grand Prix racing early in my career, got to it in '78 for the U.S. and Canadian Grand Prix. But really, my interest in all that, my hero really was a guy named Jim Clark. And Scottish driver, just seemed to be the epitome of class. Wasn't a big talker, just kind of let his results speak for himself, and those results were extraordinary. Multiple world champion in Grand Prix racing, won the Indy 500 in '65, finished second in '63. Some people think he should have won in '63 as well. Many people think he actually won in '66, but a timing and scoring snafu awarded the victory to Graham Hill, which I like Graham Hill, so that wasn't a big problem in my mind. But still, that just showed the talent that this guy Jim Clark had. And in everything he got into, he won. Whether it was Indy cars, whether it was a Lotus Cortina, whether it was a Formula One car, sports car, I mean, you name it, he touched it and he won. And the day he died, April 7th, 1968, I remember that date like I remember when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, or where I was during those things. I mean, that was the impact that Jim Clark had on me. And so if you look behind me at a number of the awards, I was really fortunate in 1990. I was awarded the Jim Clark Award at Indianapolis. And that to me was, it's obviously special, much more special winning the trophy itself, the 500 trophy, but to win the Jim Clark Award, to me personally, that was a big deal. A number of the items that you get for winning that award is a blazer in the Clark tartan up there, the blue and light blue, dark blue, white tartan. I had it framed because I don't think I could fit in it anymore, but nevertheless, there it sits. And of course, a great book. I have a number of Jim Clark books. This is, I think, probably the best done by a fellow named Graham Gold. And Graham actually gave me a Jim Clark helmet pin when I went to Jaguar Formula One in 2000. And one of my bucket list items is to go to the Jim Clark Museum in his town in Scotland, where they have most of his trophies and various other things. Aside from the blazer, you get a nice bowl, declaring you're the winner of it. But then you get 33 English crowns, and an English crown was a silver. It's currency in England. They no longer use it because it's made of solid silver. But 33, obviously, Indy 500, 33. They don't offer the award anymore, and I'm not sure why, really. I'm actually going to have to take that upon myself to convince the powers that be in Indianapolis that we need to bring back the Jim Clark Award. So in any event, this corner is kind of dedicated to my hero, Jim Clark. Now you might say, but there's a painting up there, and that's not Jim Clark, and that's very true. 1966 or 7, I can't remember the exact year, my father takes me to one of the big theaters in downtown Chicago to see the debut of the movie Grand Prix. If I needed any convincing that driving a race car would be something I'd want to do, that pretty much solved that, because I left the movie theater that night thinking, wow, that's it. That's what I want to be. And so, yeah, that's James Garner, Pete Aaron, as he was known in the movie, leading Scott Stoddard, who wore Jackie Stewart's helmet in the movie. That way they could go from real film to stage film, staged actions, and it looks the same. Aaron, supposedly that was a Yamura, or the Japanese car. It's really a McLaren. That was the color of the McLarens in those days. And I got to know Jim Garner pretty well over the years. He was a huge racing fan, had a number of racing teams that he owned back in the 60s in sports car racing. Just an awesome guy, great golfer. We'd play golf together occasionally. And so I said to him, I recounted the impact that this movie had on me personally. And he was really kind of surprised by that, I guess. And I said, Grand Prix, even today, right? And that opening scene where all you hear is an engine revving, and then as the camera pulls back, now you're looking down 2 exhaust pipes, right? And boy, if that doesn't get the blood flowing, I don't know what does. So in any event, I'm at an auction probably 20 years ago. This is the Nicholas Watts painting. That's the real painting of this scene at Monza, Italy in the movie Grand Prix. And of course, many posters were made of this picture, of this painting. But this is the real deal. And it's even more special because Jim signed it. And so, yeah, I look at that, and that to me is, aside from the fact that I think that's just an awesome time in the world of motorsport. This was the first year of the 3-liter capacity engines in 1966. So, yeah, this is my Formula One corner right here. So my last year of professional racing was 1998, and hard to believe that was 20 years ago now. And every race I went to, I received some kind of like a party gift. But probably the coolest going away gift I got was after Mid-Ohio, the other drivers in the race had all signed a pair of gloves. I'm not sure who did it, but they mounted them beautifully inside this box. And so here you have the gloves of Paul Tracy, Jimmy Vasser, Christian Fittipaldi, Michael Andretti. Unfortunately, then we have remembrances of Greg Moore. Of course, Alessandro Zanardi. But yeah, anyway, it's a selection of all the starting drivers' gloves from that race, and it's pretty cool. And really a testament to that era, too. So you saw a number of the trophies I have on the first floor here, which represent my race wins, things of that nature, really from the beginning, from 1973 all the way to the end, 1998. But in this trophy cabinet, this is really kind of the things that maybe I'm most proud of. My championship trophies from my IndyCar series, in 86, 87, and 92. Of course, we saw my Indy 500 trophy, although we also have up here the owner of the winning car at Indy, which was in 2004, with Buddy Rice driving for us. And I'm one of 3 guys who've won the race as an owner and won the race as a driver. The other 2, Pernelli Jones and AJ Foyt, so pretty good company there. Probably two that mean maybe the most to me is that I won Driver of the Year twice, in 86 and 92. And it used to be called the Martini and Rossi Driver of the Year, but that's where they judge you based against all other drivers in all other categories in North America. So drag racing, stock car racing, sports car racing, IndyCar racing, you name it. The press votes on this, and I was really proud of that because, again, look who you're going up against. The Darrell Waltrips, the Kelly Yarboroughs, the Dale Earnhardts in stock car racing, and many, many others. And then, in sports cars, Al Holbert and Jeff Brabham, people like that. So this was these 2 trophies here really mean a tremendous amount to me. Of course, winning or being inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame. You know, when I first started racing in 1973, I never thought I'd race for a living, let alone be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, that so talk about a journey. And then, of course, many of these others just reflect other halls of fames. Canada, I'm in the Canadian Hall of Fame. I'm not even a Canadian, but I spent so much time racing in Canada. I feel like an adopted son. So that's been that was great. And then a lot of the rings this one is one of the Indy rings. This is actually not the official Indy ring, but this is I really like this ring because I think it's the right size, at least for my hands. Whereas if you look at that compared to here would be another Indy 500 winning ring, and that's bigger than two of my fingers, I think. So, but in any event, so remembrances of you know, the 25 years of motorsport. This gold car, very pleased with that. Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company gave me that for winning the championship in '87. So a lot of interesting stuff, different stuff, and some of which dates back to the beginning of my career. The President's Cup that I won in 1975 after the SCCA runoffs and others. So here's Driver of the Year in 1975 from Chicago Region SCCA. That's where I started, and so those trophies are as meaningful to me based on what was happening at the time as any of these others. I've always felt that a driver's helmet design was his trademark, really, because of course the fans can't really see his face anymore like they could in the 60s. So now it's these full face helmets, which are obviously much safer than the old open face helmets. But as I said, I always felt it was a trademark. So my helmet was fashioned, I actually kind of borrowed it from Carlos Reutemann, Formula One driver from Argentina, and he had blue and yellow, which is the colors of the Argentine flag. And when I was racing overseas, I felt I should be representing the United States of America. So my helmet has always been red, white, and blue. And it's pretty simple compared to helmets that these young drivers use today, like this one that Graham gave me after his first IndyCar win at the age of 19 years old in 2008. Very proud of that, obviously. This is a family, has become a family business for us. My father, of course, drove purely as an amateur, but nevertheless, it was his experience that gave us the wherewithal and the impetus to follow in his footsteps in racing. And then, of course, Graham follows in mine. So I don't know if there's anything more flattering, frankly, than to have one of your children follow in your footsteps, no matter regardless of what you do for a living. But clearly, for the Rahal family, we're very proud of our relationship with the sport of motor racing, and very appreciative of everything it's given us and all the relationships that we've met and created over the years. So anyway, this is my helmet from my last race in 1998 at Fontana. And as I said, this is Graham's first race that he won 10 years later, hard to believe, right? 10 years later at St. Petersburg. So as a 12, 13-year-old kid in the mid-60s, the Ford Motor Company, of course, had already decided to partner with Carroll Shelby in producing the 289 Cobra. And this car is a 1965 version. Of course, the Cobra was, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but for me, you dreamt of driving a Cobra. The 289 Cobra dominated racing from probably 1963, well, for many, many years beyond that, even well past its prime. It was still the car to beat in B production and the SCCA series, and of course internationally. The 289 Cobra also served as the base for the Cobra Daytona Coupe, which won at Le Mans and various other races, Daytona, and beat Ferrari in their own game. And while this car was intentionally done to beat the Corvette Stingray, it ended up beating everything. The E-Type Jaguar, the Ferrari GTO, of course, and the Corvette Stingray. So you could buy one of these and go racing with it, or you could just drive it on the street. And it really was a car that is a car, I should say, that is iconic for what it did both on and off the track. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining with me on behalf of the Peterson Museum in Los Angeles, California. Hope you enjoyed our time together as much as I did, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere down the road.